I introduce myself? We're going to start.
Hi, LA Progressive friends and family. Today I'm joined with a dear friend who is also an author, and she's launched a new website, and she's here to tell us about it. Her name is Judith. And Judith, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, your full name, what you do, and tell us about this Calamity of Desire.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon, so much for having me. And thank you to all our listeners. I am publishing a book of short stories called The Calamity of Desire and Other Stories. It's available for pre-order right now. It will be sent to you if you purchase it now. It will be sent to you at the end of March, beginning of April. It's a group of short stories. They have all been published in literary journals. Now they're being collected in a book. It's a group of stories inspired by art history, by famous paintings that I love. It's also, I think, stories that are inspired by my desire in telling stories, in writing literature, to also show the backdrop of what's happening in the culture at the time, in the society at the time, in the politics of the time. So although the stories are primarily about these famous paintings and these famous artists, they also show what else is happening in the culture. The important literary critic Walter Benjamin said, "There is no artifact of culture that is not also an artifact of barbarism." And so that's the kind of spirit that is behind these stories. Could I describe a couple of these?
When you and I spoke, I guess, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, and you were telling me about the Calamity of Desire, when you situated these stories within what was happening socially and politically at the time that the stories or the paintings were created, that gave it a new depth. So give an example. You were talking about the Huguenots, I believe, or
Sure.
Example of some of the.
So there's one story, it's called Still Life with Cherries. It's actually inspired by a painting at the Simon Museum in Pasadena. The painter was a 17th century French Huguenot woman, Louise Mouillon. And for most of her life, she lived at the time of relative religious freedom in France. France was, perhaps, I'm not sure, still remains, primarily a Catholic country. But for most of the 17th century, Protestants were allowed to worship as they chose. But then when Louis XIII, the Sun King, came into power, he wasn't particularly religious, but because he was a Sun King and because he was Louis XIII, he proclaimed that everyone had to be Catholic. And he didn't want the Huguenots to leave because they were Protestants. They had the work ethic. They had created the first middle class in France, the first trades class. So he really didn't want them to leave, but he required them to convert. And if they didn't convert, he would send them to prisons and dungeons. They would be put on the rack. He would say things like break his bones, put them on the rack. There was a priest in one of the dungeons who became like a Mengele in the concentration camp, who became fascinated between the line of pain and death. And he would have prisoners hold burning coals in their hands and just horrendous things. I mean, we think of only the 20th century concentration camps as being the worst epitome of this, but actually, evidently, it had been going on for centuries.
Yeah. When I went to England, Madame Tussauds has a wax museum, and in some parts of the wax museum, it's dedicated to forms of torture that were used in England in the 16th, 17th, I guess, and 18th centuries, and it's unbelievable how creative people can be when they think of ways to harm other human beings. But your website, what I find really interesting is there are pieces of art that we're all familiar with, and you never really think of the art being created within a particular time frame. And as you provide the backdrop for the art, it kind of helps you to understand, well, what was the artist experiencing, or what was the artist seeing during those times when this beautiful piece was being created?
For example, the first story is a relatively short story, and you can read an example of that on my website. Is the story of the famous painting Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez. And when he was alive and when he painted that picture, it was in Spain during the time of the Inquisition. People were being burnt to death and so forth. And Velázquez was extremely ambitious. He had a studio in King Philip's castle and so forth, but he really wanted to be a knight. And in order to be knighted, he had to go through this proof that he had no Jewish or Moorish taint. So he had to be, qualified by the panel of the Inquisition. It took like 7 years or something. They decided he was okay, and so he was knighted. But the other things going on, and they used to have these auto de fes, these burnings of people alive in the central square, and they would sell seats for people to come and observe them. So that's described in the story, and that's in the background of this story. The story is about this very important painting.
So how did you do your research? Give us a background about you and what qualifies you to provide these stories.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that I'm also writing about, that I'm actually was working on today, that really interests me about this duality between our personal, intimate lives and the things that are going on more broadly in politics and so forth, is that my father was a Manhattan Project physicist who died of radiation-induced cancer when I was a very young child. It's very personal, very horrible experience for me to go through that kind of grief as a child. But I realized more recently as a writer that I'm always searching for the other things. It's not just the personal private story, although that's definitely part of it. But it's also the way in which these other things are going on in the background of our lives that somehow reflect, symbolize different things in our lives, though we never really think about them, right?
Yeah.
Most films probably, or books being written today would not include what's going on in Palestine and Israel. And yet that is going on. And it's in the newspaper.
Yeah. And I think that it does have an impact on even those who aren't in Gaza, who aren't in the West Bank. It has an impact on me. I'm here in Los Angeles, but we publish the LA Progressive, and every day there's content about it. I'm reading about it either in the LA Progressive in a piece that I'm editing and publishing, or hearing about it through some other media source. It really calls for us to reflect on our role as citizens of the United States, and paying our taxes, and how much do we support these kinds of things that are going on, because we certainly are supporting them with our dollars.
Yes.
So tell us, how do people get to this? What is the website address? The name?
The website address is the calamityofdesire.com, just as it sounds. Perhaps Sharon will post it.
I will.
And I have a request, which is that the small independent publisher is basing the royalty split with all its authors on the number of advanced sales we can make before February 7th.
So the book is The Calamity of Desire. The website is thecalamityofdesire.com, and they can access the book at the website?
Yes, and they can make their advance purchase there. And the publisher says, well, it's discounted $2 until the end, until February 3rd or something. So you can purchase it there. And it's very much, I would say, it's very much a book about these paintings that I love, these artists that I love. And so this is in the background, it's not the foreground.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's a beautiful website, and everyone that's listening to us right now will see the website because after we're done, I'm going to take pictures that will slide in over our faces. We'll show the website. We'll give a link to calamityofdesire.com where they will be able to purchase the book, and we're encouraging people to purchase the book.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
So thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll get a positive result.
Okay.
All right, so long.
That was great.